Well, good afternoon. I'm going to invite everybody to make their way in and find a comfortable spot to sit. I'm so honored to welcome you to this event today. I'm Rob Fuquay, senior pastor here at St. Luke's. And this has been an event in the making. And I just wanted to share a little bit of the backstory about how this came to be. Last October, Steve Claffey, one of our members, came to see Shelley Clausen, who is our outreach director here at the church. You're going to hear more from Shelley in just a few moments. But Steve wanted to talk with her about a fundraising event for the Crooked Creek Food Pantry. And for those of you who don't know, Steve Claffey was a longtime member of St. Luke's who served as the president of the board and the executive director for the Crooked Creek Food Pantry. And you're going to hear a lot about Steve today. His legacy continues to live through the food pantry and through the thousands of families who've been able to feed their families because of his efforts. So back to October. Steve shared with Shelley about this groundbreaking documentary produced by Dave Miner and his colleagues at the Indy Hunger Network. He wanted us to show the documentary here at St. Luke's and invite two other good friends of his, Jim Morris and Fred Glass, to both speak. So they identified a date for that event. That's today, April the 30th. We had no idea that Steve would not be with us for this event. Shortly after Steve passed away in January, we decided that we could best honor his tireless efforts at the food pantry by going ahead with the Hunger Symposium, which he envisioned. So while today is not about Steve, his fingerprints are all over it. And we hope you will join in his efforts in helping to eliminate hunger and poverty here in our city. So as we get ready to get started, I'd like to just lead us with an opening prayer, and then we'll get the day going. Lord, we do thank you for this day, even the rain that falls now. There's a nourishment that it brings. There's a feeding of the ground and earth that sustains life. And today we're thinking about the ways in which we can be a part of your life-sustaining work in the world. For those who maybe have come from a time of worship today, we pray that our souls have been restored and nurtured. And now as we start an important afternoon, reflecting upon the ways in which we can see that others are nurtured and nourished, blessed and benefiting from all of the gifts which you have put in this world, and you call us to be good stewards in sharing. Speak to us through those who come to speak. Enlighten us, give us thoughts and inspirations to be a part of this important work of eliminating hunger. So we thank you for this day and all who will be a part of it. In your most holy name we pray. Amen. Well, Shelley Clausen is our director of outreach, and I tell you what, this woman is outstanding in every way. Just outstanding. That's about the best way to put it. Would you please welcome her as she leads us in the day?
Well, thanks, Rob. Outstanding. That seems like a little high bar to live up to, so I'll do my best. You will notice in your program that Jim Morris is listed as our first speaker. I heard yesterday from his staff that he is under the weather today, so he's not joining us. Jim has been a force for good in our community for his entire life. His resume includes work with mayors and governors, the Lilly Endowment, IU and Indiana State, Riley's Children Foundation, and currently as the vice chairman of the Pacers organization. Among many other things, I actually ran out of room on my page for all of his honors and involvement. Today, he was going to share about his years with the United Nations, serving as the executive director of the World Food Program, and we will miss him today. Jim, if you're happening to watch online, we're sending you our prayers for a quick and full recovery. And so I move on to introduce Fred Glass as our first speaker. You could read about Fred in your program, but I'd like to share a little bit from an interview with Fred from the sports section of the Indy Star a few years ago. And yes, this is probably the most I've ever read from a sports section. And I had to dig back through Google a bit to find it. But this is an interview that Fred had with the Star when his book, Making Your Own Luck, was published. And there's a link to his book on our website. All the things that we'll talk about today you can find at stluke'sumc.com/hunger. In this interview, Fred was asked about his relationship with his father, which I think was a little up and down, and you can read the book for more information. But he says, one of the things my dad helped teach me, even inadvertently, I suppose, is that we're all package deals. As a kid, you play good guys and bad guys, but in the real world, we're all package deals of strengths and weaknesses. So in speaking about his father, here was this flawed person, and he didn't wear his religion on his sleeve, but he literally fed the hungry, clothed the naked, and welcomed the stranger. That's a powerful thing to observe. Perhaps the most thematic argument in his book is to embrace contradiction and complexity, that idea that we are a package deal. One of his precepts is that our greatest disappointment can create our greatest opportunities if we don't let them deter us. We'll be hearing a lot of statistics today, numbers that help tell a story of a city where 1 in 4 people experience food insecurity. We'll be challenged with stories of actual people whose lives may not look like the stereotypes we have in our minds. And I hope you keep Fred's words in mind. We are all package deals of strengths and weaknesses. And there is a place for us to stand together as neighbors with our neighbors, to stand together as equals, where we can share those strengths to build a better community. Fred, welcome to the stage.
Pastor and Shelley, thank you for the kind opening comments. I'm going to come down here so there's not so much between us, if that's okay. And I'm going to start out, I always say I'm highly coachable, and Shelley gave me a little coaching that I shouldn't assume that everybody knows a lot about Gleaners. And so just very basically, Gleaners Food Bank is the largest food bank in the state of Indiana. We cover 21 counties, Marion County, the donut counties, and east, roughly Connersville down to Madison. We touch a third of the state's food insecure, and we think of us in some ways as a wholesaler. We source food, donated food, increasingly purchasing food so that we can in turn share that with our 300 pantry partners throughout our 21 counties, Crooked Creek Food Pantry being one of the most significant ones, our third largest in our system, but 300 pantries, including school pantries and other things. So that's kind of where we fit in. I was really hoping to embarrass Jim a little today. Jim is really good at shining the spotlight on other people and very hesitant to ever shine the spotlight on himself. But I'm going to do it anyway because we all sort of know the name. Some of us know more than others about his background, but it's really the contributions, and I love the metaphor of him serving here because really he's served throughout his life. He's an Eagle Scout, proud to be from Terre Haute, proud to be an IU graduate. Met Jackie, who's a force of nature herself at IU. Joined new Mayor Lugar on his staff. I think he was only 26 years old when he became his chief of staff for 6 years, and not surprisingly, as a follower of Dick Lugar, treating people with respect and dignity is a hallmark of how Jim approaches life and certainly how Senator Lugar approached life as well. On to Lilly Endowment, where as part of the community development strategy with the sports strategy is a really critical part of our community, the water company that he led very successfully. And then on to the appointment that Shelley references, executive director of the UN's World Food Program, the largest humanitarian program in the world, where he was on the front lines dealing with folks who are facing the most oppressive kind of hunger all around the world. A really amazing role. Came back to become a senior person with Pacers Sports and Entertainment, and I read the sports page maybe a little more often than you, Shelley, but I love it that Jim said he came back to the Pacers to bring people together and lower adversarial relationships. And that's what he does. Yeah, he's on a basketball staff, but he's really about community building and does that every day. Over multiple decades, he served on the IU Board of Trustees. Maybe his most significant accomplishment, he was on the search committee that recommended me to be the athletic director at IU. At least I suggested Jim. That's one of his more important contributions. But he was chairman of the board while I was there, and we worked on a lot of thorny issues, only some of which bubbled up publicly, and he was a steady, supportive hand. So like many in this room, I'm proud to call him a friend and a mentor, someone who's a tremendous voice in the fight against hunger. And for those of you who know Jim, there's only one real way to describe him, and that's extraordinary, his favorite word. Although he always uses it in talking to other folks. Speaking of extraordinary, there's our buddy Steve Claffey, or who I'm always knew and referred to as Claffey. Steve's journey is pretty amazing, too. He was born a Hoosier in North Carolina, a big Hoosier family, but born in North Carolina because his family was in the military. Came back here, went to North Central High School, where he was a national champion in debate, on to Wabash College, where he was a national champion in debate. For those of you who knew Claffey, you wouldn't be surprised that he was a champion in debate. For some of us who didn't know some of his other side, he was also in the Glee Club at Wabash, and that love of music was part of his whole life. I understand he's in the choir here, a big fan of musicals and plays. Uh-oh, I'm not used to these things. I feel like I should be bringing the... Okay. We good there? Okay. So then after he left Wabash, he went to Washington Law School, interrupted by a service in the military. He was a staff sergeant in the U.S. military, went back to Wash U. Not surprisingly, he was valedictorian of his class, editor-in-chief of the Law Review, went to Baker & Daniels for 45 years, where he was recognized as one of the finest lawyers, not only in Indiana, but in the country in corporate law. And I was fortunate enough to be his law partner for 13 of those years. And, there's a lot of smart people at Baker & Daniels and smart people I've worked with, but Claffey was like the smartest person I ever worked with. And I would work with him on projects, and I could just see him kind of holding onto his chair because I couldn't really understand what he was talking about, and he'd be a little impatient with me, kind of keep up, keep up. And I tried, but wasn't always that great at it. He had three kids, 5 grandchildren, and his grandchildren called him Big Daddy. Because of course they did, because it was Claffey. I love that. After he left Baker & Daniels, as most of the people here know, he and Linda and this church started Crooked Creek Food Pantry, and he poured everything into it, was a driving force behind that. Claffey and I were working on some projects associated with Crooked Creek Food Pantry, and I got a email from him saying, hey, I've had a couple health setbacks. I'm going into the hospital. It's a pretty big surgery, but it's going to be fine. I'll call you in 2 weeks. And that was the last I ever heard from him. So it's really poignant to be here today after Steve apparently suggested I be a speaker and kind of come full circle. As I think is reflected in the program, Steve unabashedly said, despite all the things that he had done, that other than his family, his greatest legacy is the Crooked Creek Food Pantry. And so today, we honor Steve in this symposium, and we also honor him by making sure that the Crooked Creek Food Pantry continues to be a vital participant in the fight against hunger. So, food insecurity isn't about food, which isn't something that maybe you would think you would hear from someone who's a food banker. But food security is really about being poor. It's about poverty. And today, when we watch the documentary Working Hungry, that's really going to come home to us. Because hunger is driven by the systemic inequalities that drive poverty. The systemic inequalities drive poverty, poverty drives hunger, and there's misconceptions out there that the hungry are, watching Gunsmoke and waiting for their Gleaner's box of food to show up or something like that. But the reality is, 40% of the folks that find themselves in poverty are either kids, the elderly, or the disabled. They can't work. And the balance, almost all of them work at least one job in their household. So they are truly the working hungry, and I'm excited for you to see the documentary that brings that home very, very well. That's why I don't really consider myself to be in the charitable food business. I consider myself to be in the fighting poverty business, because we have to, through feeding people, use that as a tool to help not only feed them in the short run, but ultimately help them manage their poverty, if you will, and I think in some occasions actually pull them out of poverty through the act of feeding them, through following Matthew 25. So I want to tell you what I mean by that. So all of us, I suppose, but when you're impoverished, you spend so much psychic energy, and it's so draining just to produce a lot of the things that we take for granted, right? So the first thing is almost always putting a roof over your head. And that's a binary act. You either get enough money to pay your rent or your mortgage or whatever, or you don't. And if you pay it, you're good, and if you don't, you're out. Your lights, your utilities, your warmth is sort of the same way. You have enough money to pay your utility bill, and you pay it, and you're good, or you don't have enough money, and you're out. Food is different. We don't like people to scrimp and stretch and not eat a robust meal at every meal, but there's some flexibility with food. It's also very accessible. If you go to the Crooked Creek Food Pantry, if you go to the pantry that we run at Gleaners, if you really go to any one of the 300 pantries that we serve, if you go, you'll get fed. The barriers to that aid are very, very low. It's very, very flexible. It's very, very dependable. And so in that way, it's the most flexible, dependable, accessible, necessary, charitable food tool in the toolbox that we have. And I want to bring that home by sharing a little story about how food can be a driver in that way beyond simply feeding people. So this was not that long ago, just a few weeks ago, one of our pantry folks, our assistant pantry manager, Joey Inskeep, told me a story that, I sort of blew the punchline there, but with my itchy trigger finger, but this couple was riding their bikes to our pantry every day. Two distributions a week after week, month after month. And they'd get those, things you get from Target or whatever that hang, and they'd hang them on their handlebars, and they'd ride off. And they'd say, Joey, someday we're going to come back and we're going to have a truck. And Joey said, sure you are. Yeah, that's awesome. Yay. And then they'd come back riding their bikes. Then one day, Joey gets called up to the front of the food pantry, which if you've been around food pantries, that's not good. That usually means there's something funky going on. But it's this couple, and that's literally them in their new truck, not super new, right? But it's their new truck. And what they said was, every week we took the money we were going to spend on food, literally put it in a jar, and saved up enough money till we could buy this truck. And they were so proud of the truck, and they wanted to know if Joey was proud of them. And guess what? He's got a job because he's got transportation. They don't come to our food pantry anymore. And if I was in the charitable food business, maybe I'd have a little edge on that. Like, hey man, you could have bought the food. Why didn't you buy the food? But I'm not in the charitable food business. I'm in the fighting poverty business. And so I cheer this, right? Because they're able to use food as a tool in their toolbox, not only to manage and maybe prioritize staying in their house or keeping their lights on, which I'm fine with too, but actually build wealth and pull themselves out of poverty. So being in the business where we provide food to people facing hunger not only follows Matthew 25 and we feed the hungry and takes care of the here and now, but can also be a part of helping folks, again, manage their situation and even improve it. It takes more than feeding the hungry to end hunger. And I know this is kind of an old trope, but I want to repeat it because I think it's so critically important. Feeding the hungry is necessary, but not sufficient. We need to do that now. We can't say, hey, we get that it's systemic inequities that are putting you in the line, and those are really important. So we're going to work on those, and you hang on until we can get over there. We've got to do both. We've got to feed folks, and maybe have some outcomes like Joey's friends had, and at the same time, be very active and collectively addressing the social inequities that lead to poverty and in turn lead to hunger. Food insecurity isn't a them problem, it's an us problem. And I'm going to provide a kind of a series of grist for the mill as we lead into conversations and set the table a little bit and have my friend and colleague David Miner kind of follow up on setting the table, as it were. We talked about this a little bit. 13.5% of all Hoosiers and 25% of the people in Marion County are food insecure. 15% of our kids are food insecure, ranging from 1 in 6 to 1 in 4, depending on the county. This is amazing to me. 60% of Americans between the ages of 20 and 75 will live below the poverty line for at least 1 year. It's not them, you guys. It's us. And that's from an amazing book, Poorly Understood, that my friend David Miner recommended to me the first time we had lunch, and I read it, and it's really an awesome book about blowing up some of these myths that we have. 85% of poor people live outside of high poverty neighborhoods. You're going to hear that brought home in the documentary today. This is from this crazy left-wing entity called the Federal Reserve that observes that 37% of Americans cannot cover a $400 unexpected expense with savings. So if they don't have any alternatives, they end up in our line. People that never thought they would be in our line end up in our line. Most America's poor who can work are working. We talked about that a little earlier. Poorly Understood documents that with all kinds of data, but that's the bottom line. Two-thirds of food insecure households in Marion County have at least one employed person. And we do 4 distributions a week we run one pantry. So we're mostly a wholesale food bank supplying to other pantries. We run one pantry. It's a robust pantry. It serves almost 15% of the people we serve in our whole 21 county area from one pantry, because folks know they can get an abundant amount of varied food. We serve 4 times a week, one night, Thursday night, and one weekend, Saturday, by far our biggest ones. Why? Because people are working. This is really in the marketplace. People are working, and that drives how they access our services. But just because it's all of us, it hits some of us more than others. The biggest single predictor of poverty in adults is whether they experience poverty as a child. Talk about destiny. Talk about it's not your fault. If you're born into a poor family, guess what? You're likely to be poor, likely to be hungry. Food insecurity rates are higher for people in rural areas, which sometimes surprises folks, older adults, military families, and veterans. Is that amazing? We call people to service. They're in military families. And because they have a housing allowance that counts as money they have but can't spend and other things, they find themselves food insecure while they're in service. Veterans, communities of color have higher food insecurity rates, so you're more likely to be hungry if you're black or brown. But most people who are food insecure are white because of the numbers. People who are LGBTQ+, and people with disabilities. So what does food insecurity mean? Well, the USDA tells us that technically it means that access to food is limited by a lack of money or other resources. But let me tell you a little bit else what it means. Poor nutrition is a leading cause of illness in the U.S., associated with more than 500,000 deaths per year. Food is medicine. And when you don't get that medicine, you get sick. This blows me away. I had to double check the source. Recent estimates project that most children in America today will have obesity by the time they're 35. That's for real, you guys. Talk about a ticking time bomb, and that's driven by food insecurity. Just looking at the numbers, just looking at it objectively, it adds $1.8 billion to healthcare costs just in Indiana. And you've probably heard this before, but I think it's worth repeating. If you live in Center Township, this is as of 2018, if you live in Center Township, you have a life expectancy of 68 compared to 85 if you're fortunate enough to be born in Fishers. That just isn't right. So, we're here to talk about Crooked Creek today, and it's great because it's an example, I think, of what's going on in the charitable food / poverty fighting business. It's the third largest food pantry in our system in central Indiana. It engages 140 employees a week. Last month, it served almost 5,000 families. Over half of those families were children and seniors. And we're serving 50% more families than last year. You know, the pandemic was like a hurricane. It just whipped right up out of nowhere and came right on us and was highly visible, and there were drone shots of trucks lined up in Houston and all that stuff. But we're back to pandemic levels. The Crooked Creek Food Pantry is back to pandemic levels. Our partners across our service territory are back to pandemic levels, which did more like a flood. Slowly but surely, those waters kept rising, and now we're serving as many people as we did at the height of the pandemic. So what can we do? We can do a lot. Steve did a lot. We can donate. Shelley may talk about this more later, but I think there's multiple matching gifts in play that we can draw down with our financial gifts today. Volunteer. I threw that thing up there, however many they had, 120 or something. We have 60 a day to operate Gleaners. We couldn't operate it without our volunteers. By the way, I think it's fun. I've done it. A lot of people get their social interaction by volunteering. We have regular volunteers that are there every distribution. We have others that come and go. And then advocate. The Farm Bill is coming up in 2023. That's every 5 years. There's no greater tribute to Senator Lugar, who chaired the Agriculture Committee and was the starter of so many federal nutrition programs. No better tribute to him than to press our congressmen and senators to support federal nutrition programs in the Farm Bill. And there's other advocating we can do, and we'll see, David, if we get into some of the more statewide issues. We could talk a lot about SNAP, formerly referred to as food stamps, and the woeful policies that are in place in this state with regard to SNAP. Oh, and support the Good Wages Initiative. Good paying jobs is one of those social inequities that are driving hunger and poverty, and we'll see that in David's outstanding film. Part of the way we're trying to address that is through David's leadership in pushing for the Good Wages Initiative to try to give people decent pay and access to health care. I'm proud to say that Gleaners is a Good Wage Initiative certified employer, We felt like we couldn't be in the business of feeding people in line if our employment policies are also putting people in line. So that became a priority for us. So that's sort of the introduction. I think we're going to do Q&A at the end, Shelley. So I'll be eager to hear comments or answer questions. I enjoyed doing that. I think Dave and I are going to do that later. But thank you for your attention. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Fred. Unlike you, I need the podium and my notes so I don't leave anything out. So I'm, yes, back up here on the stage. Thanks for sharing that helpful information about Crooked Creek Food Pantry as well, and the important partnership that we have with Gleaners. We really wouldn't be able to do what we do at the Crooked Creek Food Pantry, obviously, without what you're doing. We at St. Luke's, we like to think of the Crooked Creek Food Pantry as our food pantry. It's no surprise because many of you were there from the very beginning, helping to locate a site, serving as the volunteer force, and donating thousands of dollars. In fact, 8 years later, St. Luke's members continue to give about 20% of the overall support for Crooked Creek Food Pantry and make up the single largest group of volunteers each week. How many people here have helped in the food pantry in the last, let's say, 6 months or 12 months? Okay, we've got good representation of volunteers. Thank you so much. But Crooked Creek Food Pantry isn't actually St. Luke's Food Pantry. We are one of several partners. And we would not be one of the most impactful pantries in the city without this strong coalition of partners, including Gleaners and Eskenazi Health and Corteva AgriScience. We've invited the board and the staff of Crooked Creek Food Pantry here today, so I want you guys to meet them. If you guys would just come up to the stage right now, the board members, and if there's any of the staff from CCFP, come on up front. We're going to hear a little bit from them. Break up the awkward silence.
So my name is Nikki Nace. I'm actually subbing in for Deanna Reynoso, who unfortunately has COVID. So I am on the Crooked Creek Food Pantry board. I'm a member of St. Luke's, and I'm also a physician at the Eskenazi Picard Clinic, where the pantry is co-located. So I'm all up into the business of this food pantry. And I just want to introduce all the wonderful board members. Our interim president is Dr. Deanna Reynoso, who is also the medical director for all of the social determinants of health of Eskenazi. Our vice president is Jim Wine. Our treasurer is Brad Davidson, who is also sick. Our secretary is Adeline McLaughlin. Kathy Hahn Kiner is our interim executive director. And there's also Megan Burton Kruger, Alejandro Chavez, Shelley Clausen, Byron Garman, Barb Graves, myself, and Hud Pfeiffer. And they wanted me to share a story about Steve, who I've known for many years and who's an amazing advocate. During the pandemic, the pantry, everything had to be switched on the fly all the time, making accommodations from people would shop in there to we had to go get food through the line. And there was one day at the first summer, we had a volunteer who tested positive who had been there volunteering earlier this week. We weren't sure if we could open, we didn't know what to do. But Steve, in his unrelenting dedication to helping people who are food insecure, managed to sanitize the whole pantry, found a whole other set of volunteers somehow, and we didn't miss a single day of serving clients, which just goes to show how dedicated he was. And as a physician who knows how important good nutrition is for good health, I am forever grateful for all that he did to help with the pantry. And I'd like to introduce Kathy Hahn Kiner, who was formerly the Chief Programs Officer at Gleaners Food Bank of Indianapolis. We are very lucky and excited to now have her as the Interim Executive Director for Crooked Creek Food Pantry.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I too knew Steve Claffey. I was one of the Gleaners colleagues back in 2014 when we were looking for a site and doing all the due diligence that we needed to do. He was a driving force then throughout the entire pathway, and so I am very honored to be part of, more closely associated now with Crooked Creek Food Pantry. I also want to say many thanks and kudos to our St. Luke's volunteers and supporters. Without them, Crooked Creek would not be where we are today. So each and every one of you have played a significant role, and the benefit to our community is significant. So thank you for that. And please keep coming, and please keep supporting us as we do need it. I want to also say a shout out and kudos to the awesome staff at Crooked Creek. So we've got Zach Fallbush up here. He is our operations manager and assistant executive director. And then Stephanie Santos is another awesome employee, and she is our assistant operations manager. And if you have recently been to Crooked Creek, you know what kind of job it is to serve the 4,600 people and families that were served last month. They do a great job, and certainly appreciate being colleagues with you now. And it's my honor then to introduce Barb Graves, our operation liaison and a member of the board of directors. Barb.
I just want you all to know that I've been volunteering with Crooked Creek since shortly after our doors opened. Back in the day when we thought 45 people when they were served was a huge amount and we would barely make it through. And then things changed. And I don't know, it's been a lot. But it's been a wonderful experience for me, and I think it's been a wonderful experience for most of the people that have volunteered there. I was asked why I started volunteering, and frankly, it was time. I'd had 30 years in corporate America, and finally, I had time to do something that was important. I retired, and I tangibly saw a way that I could say thank you for all I had, and I could do that by doing something for other people. And that was the first time I'd had time to do that. And it makes such a huge difference in my life. I think sometimes a lot more difference than it makes in the people's lives that we serve. So that's one of the things that I miss about Steve. Not only was he a visionary, he was willing to do whatever had to be done. So many Wednesdays he would stand with me in the sun and we would break down boxes. And he would say, "Why are we doing this?" And then he would answer his own question, "Because it needs to be done." And that was Steve's attitude. Steve was a relationship builder, and it was those relationships that make a difference. I have so many stories I could tell you, like the one Fred told you about the truck. We had a grandfather one day who told me that he used the boxes from the food that he received to make up word games to play with his grandchildren that he wasn't expecting to be raised. There was a little girl in a car seat one day that said to me, "Do you have any of those little green things?" I said, "Green things? What do you mean green things?" And then she saw them in the cart. They were grapes. She said, "I love those." And she started clapping. And then there was a woman who always says thank you to me when she goes through the line. She says, "I know God is here." And she comes frequently, and I love seeing her. But best of all, there's one story I have to share with you. I was helping distribute food one afternoon when a young woman pulled up. Her 2 children were in their back seat. I chatted with her many times, but that day she had something to tell me. She says, "I'm never coming back here." I thought, oh my goodness, what did we do? And then she said, "Because of the food that I've gotten here, I've been able to feed my family, pay my bills, and go to school. I just graduated, and now I'm an RN, and I already have a job, and I'm not coming back. Bye." And she drove off. So, there are so many stories that we will never know, but what I do know is that we give hope along the way, and I'm really blessed to be part of a team that makes a difference in the lives of others. So thanks for letting me share.
So next up is the documentary, The Working Hungry. But before we get to that, I thought it might help to give you a very quick, short break. If you need to stretch your legs or use the restroom, they're out that direction. We're going to start in about 10 minutes with the Working Hungry documentary. Welcome back, everyone. If you could make your way to your seats. I knew I was doing a dangerous thing by letting you go for a few minutes. But actually, I think that maybe some of the most important conversations that happen in these moments when we're talking to each other about what we've learned, the experiences we've had, and the ways that we want to be involved. So I actually really like hearing all of the chatter and conversation. The Working Hungry film originally aired on WFYI in October and has been shown around the state at dozens of gatherings just like this. I just learned yesterday that The Working Hungry has been nominated for a regional Emmy. That's right, we should clap for that. A group of individuals involved in Indiana hunger relief efforts produced this film as their passion project because they didn't think any Hoosier child should be hungry. We have one of those individuals here today, and Dave Miner will take the stage following the film to share a little more and to answer some questions. Right now, it is our privilege to present to you The Working Hungry.
The Working Hungry is funded by Ascension St. Vincent and these additional supporters.
We lost everything in that time frame. Lost family members because people didn't think I was doing enough.
I used to live on a farm, and I used to come here and get groceries because I needed the help.
It's worse now than it's ever been. Just keep going forward. Don't give up, no matter what. You can't give up. If you're working, keep working. Don't quit. Don't stop.
Everybody wants to be able to feed their kids without having to ask for help.
In Indiana, the percentage of children going hungry has long been worse than the national average, about 15% statewide. Especially now, with a renewed national focus on hunger, you'll hear many statistics on families and children unable to access quality, nutritional food. In Indiana, the rate of childhood hunger varies from county to county, ranging from 1 in 6 children all the way to 1 in 4, all numbers that are far too high. Looking at it another way, the Indiana Youth Institute's annual Kids Count report asks parents about their ability to feed their children. In 2022, 1/3 of families reported that food costs keep their kids from eating enough. Contrary to what you might think, most of these children are not homeless or neglected. They actually live in working families and have parents who are employed but still struggle to put nutritious food on the table.
These are the kids next to my kids in classrooms. This is the person on the soccer team that I sit next to their parents and have no clue that they struggle every week.
There are pockets of hunger throughout the entire state, not just in urban or rural areas. And I think that that would be one of the biggest fallacies that needs to be addressed, that hunger only exists in certain areas in the state. Hunger does not look alike for every child.
The need for food assistance is being addressed by food pantries, by charities like churches, and by government programs like school meals and SNAP, which provides 85% of the food. But food insecurity and hunger still reach deep into our Hoosier communities, into the lives of families you may know. It is all around us, often hidden and often where you least expect to find it. Families, especially those working hard to create the most normal life they can for their kids, don't want their neighbors to know how they struggle to keep food on the table. Yet it's a crisis that can impact every aspect of a child's life, now and far into the future. That's because poor nutrition in childhood creates poor outcomes for children and young people, both in the short and long term.
So I think that it's very important that people understand that nutrition is a part of health. And so if you aren't able to get the foods that you need to remain healthy, it's very difficult to control your blood pressure or your blood sugar if you aren't eating the proper foods.
And that impacts not only their physical health, but also their mental health. With school-age children who are hungry, it can impact their ability to learn. Something as simple as not having the energy to play. It can affect all your organ systems.
Not having access to healthy food on a regular basis has a ripple effect across a child's life. Former Indianapolis Public Safety Director Troy Riggs knows from research, data, and what he's seen on the streets how a lack of food undermines children's success.
If a child shows up to school on Monday and they're hungry, they're not focused on schoolwork. They're focused on food. What about those families that have no idea when their next meal is going to be, how they're going to provide for their family member, their loved one? That will give you a sense of desperation that people are going through.
According to the USDA, about 700,000 Hoosiers are what is known as food insecure. This hunger ranges across Indiana from border to border and affects families with children at a greater percentage. But why, at a time when unemployment is remarkably low and food is plentiful, are so many Hoosier children facing the painful reality of hunger?
We have a world now that we have two income earners in a home that possibly both have two jobs. They might be an Uber driver, and people are just trying to make ends meet. And it's just not happening today. And it's really the hidden poverty of our time, the working poor.
The conversation is always about rent, and no one wants to be homeless. And so patients will work that extra job or take an extra shift to be able to make sure that they can keep a roof over their head. And then I think that other things like food and other sustenance are placed, secondary or sometimes even tertiary because no one wants to be out on the street.
I'm so disappointed that in the richest, most powerful country in the world, that we have kids that go to bed hungry. Possibly 1 in 5 kids in the state of Indiana go to bed hungry.
The USDA defines food security as access by all people at all times to enough food for an active, healthy life. U.S. Health and Human Services says food insecurity disproportionately impacts communities of color, people living in rural areas, people with disabilities, older adults, LGBTQ+ individuals, military families, and veterans. This is playing out right here at home in Indiana. Jim Morris is an executive with the Pacers basketball organization now, but for several years he was executive director of the World Food Program, the food assistance arm of the United Nations.
A child to be hungry is wrong, and it compromises the child's life from the very beginning. The child has no chance to be successful in school. Hunger is the single greatest health issue in the world.
Everybody wants to be able to feed their kids without having to ask for help. And especially parents that are working should be able to put food on their table. It shouldn't be so prohibitively expensive to support your family if you're working.
When you think of poverty in America, what image comes to mind? Did you know that 85% of poor people live outside of high poverty neighborhoods, and that 85% of counties with persistent poverty are rural counties? Hunger doesn't know city boundaries. It is everywhere in Indiana. We're going to meet 3 Hoosier families, 3 working families trying to do everything right, but still fighting an uphill battle to keep their children fed. You should know you won't actually see very many children because the stigma of hunger is still very powerful.
Looking back on life and the things I experienced here is things I don't want my children to experience. And so everything that I do now is to try to help build them a brighter future and to give them more of an opportunity to be successful in life.
Lamont Hollins grew up on the Near East Side of Indianapolis in a single-parent home. When his mother was killed outside their apartment, young Lamont went to live with his grandmother, a woman who epitomized the value of hard work and community to him. Lamont and his wife have always worked until Lamont suffered a debilitating shoulder injury while employed by a shipping company. Even then, Lamont found joy in mentoring young people and in feeding others. It was another value passed on by his grandmother.
I had to find something that I could do, and that was something we started building off of. So when I come back from college, I lived here with my grandmother. By far the favorite day of the week was Sundays, because you always knew that we were gonna have a meal, a big meal. And so I grew fond of barbecuing. We grilled all the time, nonstop. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning, we was firing up the grill.
Over years of working to build a barbecue business and simultaneously working around the legal issues of his injury, the Hollins family, including 4 sons, has faced successes and setbacks.
I had multiple surgeries in between there trying to figure out what was going on. The disability process within itself was a whole nother arena. The attitude was, keep working until you die.
Still, the Hollinses kept cooking. An arrangement to sell their custom sauces didn't pan out. An East Side restaurant let them barbecue in an adjacent parking lot until local ordinances on commercial cooking operations priced them out of business.
So on the weekends, we would set up a tent. So it'd be me, my wife, and the boys.
The family ultimately moved out of Indianapolis to a suburb to be closer to the resources that could assist them and their children. Lamont is making the most of his time finishing his college degree while continuing to work in grocery delivery. His wife continues to work as well, and they still cater events for fans of their food. But as with many families struggling to keep the bills paid, every little setback, a car problem, an illness, keeps them from taking the next step towards success. Still, these parents are determined that they will leave their kids a better legacy than they had.
We continue to work hard every day and crush down the roadblocks in front of us and opening up the path for them.
Hello. Hello. And this in here's our pig ride, our hog roast we're gonna have, our silent auction, and we've got a motorcycle ride, car show, a whole bunch of good stuff in there. Yeah.
Carolyn Begley embodies the phrase starting over. From the rural community of Jennings County in southeastern Indiana, Carolyn suffered a severe brain trauma in her 20s and has spent the intervening years relearning everything.
I'd had brain surgery, and I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't know my colors. I had to relearn all my shapes, my signs, and I've just learned how to read.
Carolyn now works in the very food pantry that once helped her. She lives in what is termed a complex household, a situation in which more generations and family members live together because of strained financial circumstances. A widow, she now lives with her sister while helping raise her teenage grandson.
I used to live on a farm, and I used to come here and get groceries.
Now Carolyn works at the Good Samaritan Food Pantry, providing the services she needed then and still needs now. But she's making her way through a training program.
It's like I was on disability when I first came here. We retrain under the National ABLE program. I relearn things. It's like I'm learning shipping and handling right now. The end of December of 2023 will be my end of my 4 years. And then I will be able to go on to the community.
Financial security is still distant for Carolyn. She and her grandson had to pool their money for a repair on the car she uses to get them both to work. She's already been offered retail jobs, but remains committed to finishing her training program.
When I first came here, I couldn't add, I couldn't spell, I couldn't use a calculator. I could not make a decision of any kind on my own. This is my purpose. Helping others and the pantry is my purpose in life. God gave me a reason to live, a reason to help others, a reason to have to think. And these people here have helped me.
Every morning I get up about 5 o'clock and, Monday through Friday, and we just got to keep our head, if we can just keep it above water, I'm okay. So I can survive, I have to. I have no choice. And I think, that has a lot to do with that, has a lot to do with being in the service, for all those years, having to get by. Oh, I can roll it up.
Robert Miles did tours of duty in Bosnia and Afghanistan. He remains grateful for his ability to serve his country and has always found a sense of attainment in working. His family moved from their home in southern Indiana to Hamilton County because they believed the schools in Carmel would be a better fit for their son's special education needs. He has struggled for years to acquire a job that will allow them to find comfortable living conditions.
That's why it's difficult here for me to go from job to job, because I never felt stable. I didn't have that feeling of accomplishment that I did when I was in service. I felt like I was bulletproof. Felt like I was a superhero. When you put the uniform on, it just makes you feel like you're wearing armor. Like nothing can hurt you, nothing can bother you.
After a lengthy and anxious application process, Robert was able to get a position he was hoping for at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Indianapolis. It is full-time work, and he finds it very fulfilling.
Once you work at the VA, your service never stops. You continue that, and it just makes me feel good. So this is where I park every day. Go in here, I'll get my mask on, and then get my bag of lunch together, and this is it.
Unfortunately, the Miles continue to struggle to find housing in their chosen community. Robert's wife homeschools their son while the couple continues to apply for rental houses. At the time we spoke to them, they were living in a hotel and being provided food through an agency. Rising home costs and technology issues many of us take for granted can impede families like theirs trying to take the next step up toward financial independence.
Well, it's very complicated, actually. When you fill it out, they require you to submit and upload pay stubs, bank statements possibly. They want your ID. Everything is online. You put your credit card in to pay the fees. Who knows, that could be your last money that you had, and you're giving it to someone else when it could feed your family.
If you're living in poverty, you're likely to be moving around a lot. You're likely to be evicted or staying on your sister's couch for a while, or trying to move into a safer neighborhood. And so all that moving can separate you from your important pieces of paper. And then getting copies of things actually costs money, which we don't always think about. So all those little things can be barriers that we don't think about in terms of accessing food.
Christine Garner is the executive director of the Marshall County Neighborhood Center in Plymouth, Indiana. She's been witness to the same problems and frustrations for her entire life.
I was born and raised in Plymouth. As a young girl, I remember very vivid memories of my parents' Sunday school class providing Christmas for families in our community. And I can remember walking into homes that had dirt floors and just realizing this happens in my hometown. That was a memory that I can't ever shake. We just miss that rural image of families who are trying really hard and kids are left alone to fend for themselves, or they just can't make their ends meet in a family, and there's very limited supply of food in their house.
The Marshall County Neighborhood Center isn't the only food pantry in Plymouth and the surrounding area, but it offers a wide range of services. Christine sees how every little setback, from transportation to paperwork, combines to create a massive barrier to families just trying to get by.
This is where I wish I could help people connect all these little dots. For example, a lot of factories. We have a lot of factories. A lot of our middle income families are employed through a factory. They have a point system. So if you miss work and you have 10 points now because 2 points for missing work, 1.5 points for being late one day or having to leave early or half a day, at 10 points you lose your job. Are they gonna have to be home sometimes because their child is sick? And how do we make that okay? Not every family here has a grandma and an aunt or an uncle or a sibling who can say, well, I'll come stay with your kid. They shouldn't be going to work if they're sick. They should be allowed to stay home. They should be allowed to take their child to a doctor.
Pastor John Barker of Garrard Chapel in Bowling Green, Indiana, sees the working poor crisis play out at his church's food pantry month after month. The pantry is open 8 days a month and serves clients from up to 15 surrounding counties.
We try to provide everything for the family, from the seniors all the way to the youngest. And that's one reason we're open on Wednesday, and then we're open 2 nights a week, second and third, and the second and the fourth Thursday for those parents that work, because just because you work and make $10 or $12 an hour don't mean you support a family of 2 or 3, all right? Especially with the cost and the drama that's going on in most of their lives today.
Barker is a military veteran who will tell you his specialties are logistics and loving the people who come to his church and pantry. Important characteristics when upwards of 250 families come for food in a single day.
I see stress in the parents, I see stress in the grandparents. I want to be healthy, I want to be happy. Those things food can give you, but it's just part of the formula.
One important barrier that we find with our families who are struggling to feed their children is pride. Many do not want to admit that they need the assistance.
The first time I came in to get food here, I felt like the lowest of the lowest. But I felt like, man, this is really hitting the bottom. This is really low. And I felt really, really bad.
Well, what we have found through the pandemic, that a lot of us are a paycheck away from poverty, homelessness, and it's not just that certain section of people that we used to stereotype.
Like how can you be proud if you're in this position, you know?
If you're working full-time, you should be able to meet your needs. You should be able to pay your rent. You should be able to put food on the table. You should be able to pay for basic things like health care. And if you're working full-time or even working 2 or 3 jobs and still not able to do that, there's a problem with what we're paying people in this country.
In 2022, decades of public policy support, much of it through tax credits at the federal level, have finally narrowed the national poverty gap. But when it comes to keeping children fed, that gap is not closed.
There are lots and lots of programs that help provide food to people, but if they don't know where those programs are, how to access them, they don't have the time or the ability to get to those places, they're still not getting the food that they need.
Families know the challenge of raising children, even under the best of circumstances. Now, imagine being a single parent or even a household of 2 or more working adults, holding down between 3 and 4 jobs to make ends meet, keep your children housed and fed with some kind of food you can afford, then fighting to produce paperwork and manage online forms with little sleep. What is the next step to reducing the barriers working families face in trying to achieve a strong, healthy, and consistent diet? Leading Indiana employers increasingly believe the answer is jobs with the wages and benefits needed to support stable and productive lives. In Indiana's economy, a sustainable wage is at least $18 an hour with health benefits. Cook Medical and Cook Group are major international manufacturers based in Indiana. They are working with Goodwill of Central and Southern Indiana to help change both the wage and food access narrative in an Indianapolis neighborhood. It was an eye-opening experience for Cook President Pete Yonkman.
When we think about insufficiency of food or food access, quite honestly, this is not an issue I knew a whole lot about. Our first focus was on providing a manufacturing opportunity, providing jobs opportunity, partnering with Goodwill to provide, wraparound services like life coaches and transportation, childcare, all those things that we thought would be necessities for being successful at work. So if you're at home and you can't reliably feed your kids breakfast, or you don't have access to food, how do you expect somebody to show up for work and be focused on quality? All the things that we want our employees, they want them to be engaged and thinking about the quality of the products, particularly in a field like ours where we're making medical devices.
Now, not only does the neighborhood have reliable, wage-earning jobs in the partnership between Cook Medical and Goodwill, the literal front yard of the facility will boast a new partnership, one that brings a new local, affordable grocery store operated by 2 young local entrepreneurs. Unhealthy convenience store food will no longer have to be the first option and sometimes the only option for workers or neighbors.
They're worrying about those things, then they can't think about and be engaged in the work that we're doing, particularly in a highly safety-sensitive work environment.
Kirsten Janik is the Chief Talent Officer for Heritage Construction Materials. The company's workers are most obvious in road construction zones around the state, in bright vests and hard hats, placing orange barrels and repairing roadways. Dangerous work that requires sharp focus.
We believe a sustainable business model is not only one that we care about employees, but one where we can manage turnover. So from a sustainability perspective for our business, it's important that we're meeting those basic needs, we're paying a living wage, and that employees can show up feeling like they can be engaged and that they don't need to be out looking for something else to meet those basic needs.
Heritage Construction Materials and more than 60 other Indianapolis employers are part of the growing Good Wages Initiative. The Good Wages Initiative certifies, celebrates, and showcases Marion County employers who provide full-time employees a wage of at least $18 an hour and access to health insurance benefits. More food pantries will not solve the problem of hungry children in working families. They need systemic responses like the Good Wages Initiative.
I think as employers, we really have to step up, and they have the least amount of barriers and stressors in their way to do that. One of those being food insecurity. And it's a community issue, and we have to be good stewards of the community.
The Indiana Community Action Poverty Institute has new data on working Hoosiers. The Institute found that of the 20 most common occupations in Indiana, 12 pay a median hourly wage less than $18. 9 of them are actually under $15 an hour. For example, there are nearly 100,000 people employed in Indiana as fast food counter workers. There are over 92,000 freight handlers, jobs we called essential during the pandemic.
Poverty is not a choice. Poverty is a circumstance people find themselves in. Most of them are working. And if we aren't paying people enough money to support themselves, we need to be thinking about whether or not that's a system that's fair.
If you've got 1 in 4 kids who aren't able to be secure in where they're getting their next meal, that's a crisis that we need to be thinking about. We can't be successful as a state. Talk a lot about workforce development, talk a lot about opportunities. If you've got 1 in 4 kids who are struggling, it's going to be a very hard road.
Research shows that government, churches, and charities respond in good, real-time ways to keep families fed. But ending hunger for good will require a deeper commitment.
I do not want my neighbors to be hungry. I do not want a single child, for whatever reason, to be hungry. And we have the wherewithal of finances, commodities, programs, passion, commitment to see that the people who are, for whatever reason, often not of their own making, are helped and supported and encouraged. That's the way it needs to be.
In order for the economy to turn around and in order for people to get back to normal, they have to speak up. They have a voice to use. I fought for that voice. They should use it.
Almost every one of them say, I'm doing it for my kids, right? I want them to see the benefit of what this is. I want to improve their life. I want them to see the value of work. So I see it as not just a way to change what this person's life is and to be able to make a difference there, but you're making a generational difference.
If we do make it, or when we do make it, is more the question. We are going to be able to put more of a imprint on our community and being able to bring meaningful jobs that changes people's lives.
Right now I'm drowning, you know, and without my family, I don't know where I would be right now. I work hard. Just give me something. Give me some hope, you know, so I can keep moving forward.
Hi, my name is Grace Kozak, and I am the state organizer for Indiana with Bread for the World. As we saw in the film, there's no one way to end hunger, but the thing we really need is systemic solutions. And so at Bread for the World, what we do is we advocate for policies that will help end hunger both in the United States and around the world. It's a problem that we need the government to step up and help us solve. We would love to meet with you and talk more about your interests and how you would like to get involved in this advocacy work to end hunger, together with all of the other advocates across the network of Bread for the World.
Hi, I'm Pastor Linda McCrae from Central Christian Church in Indianapolis, and our church is a good wages employer. Our employees are human beings, and we want to treat people with dignity. So rather than forcing people to look for ways to fill the gaps between what their income covers and what they need, we would rather pay them what they need. If you're not from Marion County, you might want to start your own living wage certification initiative. Information and support are available to assist in that process.
Hi, I'm David Miner. I was the founding board chair for Indy Hunger Network. Indy Hunger Network is a collaboration of all the major food assistance providers in central Indiana working to make the system work better for those who need our help. We can use professional volunteers as we work to make things better. In particular, Indy Hunger Network can use people with communications experience, people with data management experience, and people who are experienced in cooking education. Information is also available to help those who want to start a collaboration in their own town or city if you're outside of central Indiana.
Well, I'm not Dave, but he's coming up in just a second. This was not the first time I viewed that, but it was just as impactful to get a different perspective on what hunger looks like in our city. Dave Miner, as you can tell, was a big part of getting this film produced, and he's here today. You can read some about his bio, but what you may not know, because it's not printed there, and the way actually I was introduced to the idea of Dave when someone asked if I knew him. He's the guy who went on the hunger strike a few years ago in protest and to raise awareness when the federal government was talking about reducing food stamps or SNAP benefits. So talk about committing your life to this issue. I'd say Dave has definitely done that. He's going to come and share some of his thoughts about his involvement, and following that, we're going to take a few minutes for Q&A. Because I think there's been a lot more raised up in our minds than maybe we have answers to. So we want to give that opportunity. In order to do that, we have a slide that has a phone number you can text your questions to, and we'll leave this up while Dave's talking. So if you have a question that you would like to ask Dave, and I think that Fred is still here. There he is. I was looking for you. Then they will come up afterwards and answer some of our questions. And then we're going to close the day with 4 very specific takeaways that we have for you to as a way we could leave feeling overwhelmed and what do? I want to do something, but I don't know what. And we've identified 4 very specific things that are also in your program that we're going to talk about. So Dave, come on up.
Stand down here as well. I want to start with a lot of thanks. I want to thank Shelley, who's done an amazing job putting this program together, and Rob and the St. Luke's community for putting this together. It's really a beautiful lineup. Rob has been an advocate for the hungry with Bread for the World, and I'm really grateful for his leadership. I want to thank Jim Morris. Jim has many friends, but I'm really grateful to be counted among them. He has been passionate about Bread for the World, about Indy Hunger Network, about the Interfaith Hunger Initiative, about the Alliance to End Hunger, which didn't even get mentioned here. All things Jim has been really active on, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for Fred. Gleaners I've known all of the CEOs of Gleaners, and Gleaners has been blessed with great leadership. And I'm really grateful for Fred and for his vision for the next step for Gleaners. It's really exciting. I'm excited and thankful for all that's been done with the Crooked Creek Food Pantry. I actually connected Jamelyn Williamson with some friends of mine who are active in hunger at what was then Dow AgriSciences. So at the very beginning when people were starting to get together, and it's amazing to see what it's grown into. I want to thank my co-workers in the film. Shannon Cagle is here. Wave, Shannon. Who's our producer. Shannon had a personal experience of hunger and wanted to do a documentary. She actually talked to me at least 6 or 8 years ago, and just recently it seemed like the time was right, and you can see all the amazing work that she did, first making sure we did the right filming, but then secondly, taking hours and hours and hours of footage and producing a cogent 30-minute documentary. David Duncan did some amazing video work that you saw there, and we're also deeply grateful for Ann Ryder, who heard about the project. Everybody knows Ann Ryder, of course, and jumped at the chance to be our narrator on a volunteer basis. So a lot of people to say thank you to. And finally, I want to say thank you to the 3 families to step out in the way that they did and put themselves on camera. One of the things I learned from the filmmaking process was how difficult that is. Stigma is still very, very real. And so we talked with a lot of people who would have been perfect for the film, and they couldn't do it. So really grateful for Lamont and Robert and Carolyn, who all are wonderful, interesting people just trying to get by. I'm so grateful that they were willing to, they did it to try to make a difference for others. That's why they agreed to put themselves out there. So we're really grateful for that. So I want to back up a little on how did we get to the point of making this film. So I retired from Lilly about 15 years ago, and the first thing I got involved with was the Interfaith Hunger Initiative with Kent Millard and St. Luke's and Second Presbyterian and lots of other wonderful congregations, and that flowed into Indy Hunger Network. Indy Hunger Network is the collaboration of all the major food assistance providers in the city. So I happen to know about groups like this across the country, and we are blessed to have literally the strongest collaboration of this kind anywhere in the country. So Gleaners, Second Helpings, Midwest Food Bank, Meals on Wheels, St. Vincent de Paul, everybody comes together at the Indy Hunger Network table. And as well as we convene all 200 food pantries in Marion County for a food pantry summit. So the idea was there's enough food to go around. So if we collaborate, then we can make sure that nobody goes hungry. And I had very specific instructions, by the way, repeated on a regular basis from Jim Morris and also Jeff Simmons of Elanco, president of Elanco, who provided the big initial grant to Indy Hunger Network. So no child is going to go hungry, right, Dave? When are you going to get there? So, you know, I thought, okay, you know, let's do this. So the groups have done really phenomenal work on a whole bunch of ways. We worked on school breakfast. We worked on cooking education. We worked on improvements to pantries through a grant program and best practices. The collaboration just in itself. In the early days of Indy Hunger Network, one of the things I particularly remember was somehow right before Christmas, somebody would get a truckload of bananas. And, you know, you can't let the bananas sit around, right? So, you know, it would be brought to the board, oh, we've got a truckload of bananas, and they would figure out how they were going to divvy that up. Well, that was years ago. That collaboration is so strong now that, and I won't get the numbers right, but that Second Helpings sends 1 million pounds of food to St. Vincent de Paul. And these kinds of, so the level of collaboration is just phenomenal. Each of the individual members have made great progress. So there's a couple of years before the pandemic, actually, Second Helpings, Gleaners, Midwest, all the players had doubled their output of food. So dramatic improvements. And then it was mentioned information here. There's a wonderful app where you can access it on a website now called Community Compass. Community Compass started out as just Marion County. Now anywhere in the state, you can look up and see where's a nearby food pantry? Are they open right now? What do I need to provide them? So that came through Indy Hunger Network, a strong partnership from the city of Indianapolis. So all kinds of improvements. When we hit the pandemic, we do a relatively regular survey of hunger in Marion County. So we've done 5 major surveys. By chance, our third one was right before the pandemic hit, so in February of that year. So we had a baseline in February, and then of course we all know what happened in March, right? The need for food doubled. So twice as much. How many of you have been to Gleaners? Yeah, a lot of people. You know, right? The size of Gleaners, right? And all of a sudden, we needed twice as much food from Gleaners and everybody else. We needed twice as much food out of the federal programs, which provide 85% of the food. But because of the collaboration that was already in existence, the groups could respond literally instantaneously. And Congress made some changes to the federal nutrition programs to make them more flexible. And so even when the need for food doubled between February and May, we met that need. We went back and did another survey in May, and the gap in meals as a percentage of the total meals provided was no different than in February. So you think about it, truly a remarkable response. Some of the other things, though, that we've learned in the research we've done are not quite so exciting. One of them is that despite the fact that we're meeting most of the meals for most people most of the time, in fact, if you look at a percentage of meals, it's 2% of meals that are missed. That's not, 98%, that's pretty darn good. But if you ask individual families, 1/4 of those food insecure families in Marion County missed meals in a given week, right? They didn't miss very much, but they missed meals. So even though we're meeting 98% of the total supply, people are still food insecure. And Fred talked about, the implications of food insecurity. So that's still a challenge ahead. The other one I honestly was really disappointing to me. One of the questions in the survey, which we've now done 5 times, is a nutrition question. And Gleaners with their produce mixing center And just really all the members of the network have made a lot of improvements in terms of the quality of the nutrition they provide. A lot of the food pantries when we're getting started didn't even have refrigeration, right? Now people have refrigeration, they have freezers. So all of this good work across the system. But when we looked at the numbers, the percentage of people who still are not eating nutritiously had hardly moved at all between 2014 and 2021. So in 7 years of really good work by all the parties, we are still nowhere near where we want to be in terms of the quality of nutrition that people actually get. And that's, of course, because good food is more expensive than cheap food, and so it's when food is as Fred showed you, when food is the last thing, right, you're going to get you're short good food and nutritious food in particular. So 20% of families rarely or never eat a nutritious meal. I mean, and so a lot of progress, really good job in sort of providing meals at least, but still a long way to go in terms of where we want to be, which is nobody goes hungry and everybody's eating nutritious meals. So weave that in with one more thing. The Indy Hunger Network board was meeting, and we had somebody come from CICF, one of the wonderful foundations in Indianapolis, and we thought he was going to talk to us about one thing, and instead he read us the Riot Act in a nice way, as foundation people do. He said, you guys got to do something so we don't have so many people in line at the food pantries. And we're all like, whoa, yeah, you're right. So a couple of things came out of that. One is the Good Wages Initiative. Another one was the film, because there's a lot of lack of understanding of the reality of hunger, either the numbers or what it looks like, what the challenges of people's families. And so it was at that point that I got in touch with Shannon and said, okay, I think it's time that we do this film. So that's the origin of how we ended up doing the Working Hungry. And Shannon had tons of experience. I had zero. So about a year ago, we were having real trouble finding families, and I was the one that was supposed to find the families. So it was really, honestly, very difficult, but we did, and we got these 3 wonderful families, and the film is been extremely well received. We ran it first with families in the Circles program, where they're working with people out of poverty, and then we showed it to food pantry directors, and then we showed it to people who work with the Indiana Youth Institute, work with kids, and they all say, you got it right. So we're really, really gratified by that. But then also, they want to show it again. So I was at a showing yesterday, and actually, Chris Garner from the Marshall County Neighborhood Center, she did a showing in Plymouth, and one church said, well, we want to show that, and another food pantry said, we want to show that to all our volunteers because they don't know these stories. So people are seeing it as useful, and it's getting the word out, and that's really what we hoped for. So with that, we'd love to take your questions, right? That we've just thrown a lot of information at you, and I'd love to take your thoughts and questions. Somebody start.
Well,
you've got some?
I have a few, yes.
Okay.
And then if you have other questions, please use that number and text. They're showing up on my phone, so I can ask your questions. We've got somebody who has asked about the current Medicaid recertification requirements, the congressional proposal to strengthen work requirements. They're just wondering if you've got some insight and feedback on how that's going to impact everything.
Yeah. I'm not really in a position to comment on Medicaid. But I would say in regard to work requirements, there are work requirements. We don't need work requirements. We already have work requirements. And when most people are working, driving people and adding more paperwork, by the way, is really not helpful. So If we want to drive down the cost of the federal nutrition programs, which is a really good idea, we need to do things so that people don't need those federal nutrition programs. That's the answer, not making it even more difficult to apply for them. So.
All right, here's the question, and Fred, you may jump in on this one too, I'm not sure. This person is asking about supply chain logistics and the usefulness of artificial intelligence. And is that starting to be implemented into the food insecurity world as well?
I definitely can't answer that one.
I'll get it.
Feeding people who need to be fed is a huge challenge, even before we get to the even more difficult challenges of addressing root causes and so forth. So Gleaners is the leading provider of food pantries throughout our service district. We have a 300,000 square foot warehouse. If anybody's interested in coming to see it that hasn't seen it, I really encourage you to do so. So it is a logistics course and advanced logistics. We have folks that do nothing but acquire the food, move the food out, get it in huge quantities, break it down into small quantities. So it is a huge technology piece. We haven't let loose Skynet and the robots yet, but who knows? It may be leading to that, but I can't say that we've really captured that yet.
Sort of a related point. The real logistics, that's important logistics, but the other important logistics problem is the individual families. Right, so you might wonder why, if there's food out there for them, are 25% of the families in a given week not getting enough? And it relates to Fred's statistic about people who have basically no assets, right? So if your car breaks down, right, you can't get to the food pantry. Our public transportation system isn't what it should be. You had enough hours last week at work, but this week your hours are down and you just can't get, so access is really the issue for the families, is the primary issue. Accessing the federal nutrition programs when the application processes are not easy. Yeah.
Is there a statistic on average wait times at food pantries to receive food? Both of you, I think, talked about long lines and that.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's statistics, but for example, at the food pantry that we run at the Gleaners Food Bank, when we were doing in-person pantries where people would get out of their cars and come in and be able to go, and you like that because it's a little closer to a grocery experience, and we want to have dignity. But the wait times, because that's so inefficient, were up to 3.5 hours for folks. So we've gone to a drive-through approach, which our clients, customers, neighbors actually like better for a variety of reasons. And through efficiencies, we've been able to go, and I'm really proud of this, from 100 households per hour to 300 households per hour. And that's really because we've empowered the pantry folks on the front lines to say, you guys figure it out. We're not going to figure it out up here and tell you what to do. You figure it out. And they've taken that ball and run with it. And so that's important to get everybody fed, but also to have a more dignified experience. And so if you get in our line, you'll be through and out within 30 to 40 minutes.
Yeah. That's a really good question, though, right? Because by the time you made your way to the food pantry in the first place, regardless of whether it's Gleaners or somewhere else, and then get your food and then head back home, right? That's a lot of time. And for folks that are on the edge, it's important.
I was visiting, I try to visit food pantries every month, and I was visiting one, and it was another food pantry that does a drive-through, and while I was there, a family, a van full of people, including little kids, they ran out of gas in line. And, they were humiliated, the kids were embarrassed, heads were down, and I was talking to the pantry person, they said, it happens all the time. And it's just a reminder how close to the edge these folks are. One of our development people came out of the office and waved to the last person in the line. You know, they got their food, they said, "Have a nice day." And they said, "Well, it will be now that we have food." And when she went out to get her car in the parking lot, that family had pulled over and started eating the food that we had just given them. So, you know, these statistics and all that are what they are, but when you see how close the line the people are that we're serving, it really makes you want to drive to not only feed them, but address some of the root causes that are putting them in line in the first place.
So a follow-up question to the efficiency. I know that before the pandemic, the Crooked Creek Food Pantry and maybe Gleaners were called client choice pantries. We found because of the pandemic, we had to go to the drive-through, and seeing the efficiencies really, really improve. So I wonder if you could just talk for a minute about the different kinds of benefits that drive-through versus client choice actually is offering to neighbors.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. It's a complicated piece. So generally, like I said, and intuitively, it's like in-person is better. It's more like a grocery store experience. There's inherently more choice and all that. At least at our pantry, the reality was that it wasn't better because we think to have a really well-run, you know, in-person experience, you need maybe 20,000 square feet. We had 7,000 square feet. We were trying to put too many people through an experience, and so it was. I don't mean to be flippant, but when I saw it, it was like the BMV meets the Politburo. You know, it was like not a great experience there. So we were comparing sort of this idealistic, perfect in-person to what we had, and that's not what we had. We had a less than good in-person experience. So we went drive-through. Drive-through is a huge innovation during the pandemic. It had never been done before, and it really saved people's lives. I don't think it's hyperbole with the drive-through. We got away from that, and then when the flood came back and the wait times got too long, we went back to it temporarily. The decision we've made is, as long as the drive-through is a temporary experience, we're not going to do the things we need to do for choice and wraparound services because we always have this idea we're going to go back from it. So at Gleaners, we're going all in with the drive-through experience, and we think through technology, maybe some of the artificial intelligence that people were talking about, but 98% of our clients have phones, right? And we've got all their numbers through K-Launch, and we can communicate with the people we serve. So why couldn't we do a Chick-fil-A thing where, you know, Bob and Susan ask for what they want, even in a drive-through situation? We can give them what they want, which is more dignified, and P.S. cuts back on food waste, right? Because they're not throwing away what they don't want. And have wraparound services. So if you ever do curbside with Kroger, it'll pop up and say, "Hey, 2 for $1 pork chops," or something. What if it popped up and said, you know, dental exams next week, health screenings next week, utility relief person will be here next week. So we think we can go to drive-through and experience folks like better, incorporate in the choice and wraparound services we want, and then export it to the other pantries, most of whom, like Crooked Creek, are going to drive-through for the same reasons.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah. And I'm going to say this question, but I think you already answered it, but I want the people to know that I'm getting and asking your questions, because a couple people have come through with questions about connecting families with other services, like job skills, training, schooling, any other problem-solving needs beyond food. And I think you've talked about this being a potential way to do that.
Just real briefly, right now, we have a resource center, our old pantry that was in person. We have regular, all these variety of services we were talking about, you know, rent relief, utility relief, employee Indy, and we try to drive traffic in there. And we do that, but we think it's ultimately going to be, and you know, it's the old banquet tables and people walk around, and we do get traffic, and we do have people get access to those services. We think doing it as a matter of technology is going to make it more accessible, and we'll scale it, as they say, to get it to more people.
Yeah, thank you. This will be the last question we have, and this will go back to Dave. About the Good Wage Initiative. If a good wage is $18 an hour and health care, are the working poor you see qualified for jobs that pay that level of wages? And if not, what are we doing about job training?
Yeah, so there's a whole range of jobs, right, up and down the skill level, and there are higher paid jobs that are unfilled. And so, as a pick on Robert here, if Robert can get a better paid job, right, that's great for Robert and his family. But that doesn't change the job that he left, right? So it's an and. We do need to help people who want to get more skills and move up, but there's still 12 of the 20 most common occupations that don't pay a living wage. And so if people move up, again, that's great for them as individuals, but what about the 700,000 jobs out there that are not living wage? I mean, we need to do both. The Good Wages Initiative in Marion County is not a minimum wage. It's a recognition and a celebration and an encouragement to those employers like Gleaners who have made a commitment that all their employees will be at that living wage level. So it's a voluntary, but we think it's really important, as actually Fred outlined. I was at a meeting, actually one of the early showings of the film, with a group of people working with people in poverty. And so they'd seen the film, and this one woman, asked me, well, but what about, these people don't have degrees, or, and I said, yeah, they don't have degrees, but they're human beings. As Christians, we would say, God, Jesus is in all of them. Don't they deserve, if they work hard, work full time, to be able to feed their own families? I was visiting a food pantry here on the north side of Indianapolis several years ago, and standing in the doorway, it wasn't Crooked Creek, standing in the doorway of talking with the man who was running the food pantry, and this pantry did a lot of wonderful stuff, and it was bright and well lit. I mean, they were doing a really good job, and he was explaining it all to me. And in the door, this pantry was running from 4 to 6 on a weeknight. In the door came 3 people, and they all had on the same corporate logo jersey of a very well-known Indianapolis company. And I thought, oh, they've just put in a full day and they've come to volunteer at the food pantry. No. They just put in a full day and they had to get food from the food pantry in order to feed their families. And that's just not right. So that's the kind of thing that's driving us with the Good Wages Initiative.
Yeah, thank you both for taking time and for the great questions. Okay, before we let you go, we do want to talk about what can you do about this. And in your program, if you kind of let it open to the middle section, you'll see where there's some very specific action steps you can take. Our Midtown campus, those of you who are not St. Luke's people might not know that we just launched a campus in Broad Ripple, Midtown. And so they wanted specifically something for their group in their neighborhood. And so we've got a community garden that they're going to have the opportunity to work in throughout the summer. There's a QR code to sign up for that. That is not specifically only for Midtown, but we did want to have something that their community could really rally around. So anybody's welcome to join that. And then let's talk about the Crooked Creek Food Pantry. You've heard a lot about our food pantry and the challenges it's facing because of the amount of food insecurity in our city, as well as just the leadership change that we've been going through. And thankfully, because we have strong partnerships and such a solid group of volunteers, the food pantry is on stable ground, but we still need your help to keep that going. And so we have 2 matching donations that come in the next month out as a result of this symposium. Up to $25,000 will be, your $1 will turn into 3. We have 2 matching donations of $25,000 from St. Luke's and from the board of the food pantry putting up that money. So we would love to see that maxed out, and $75,000 this month for the food pantry would go a long way to feeding a lot of people. And also there is a QR code you can use to volunteer. It takes you right to their Sign Up Genius to volunteer. I know there were a couple questions that I didn't get to ask that came through text about how to volunteer. So if you want to volunteer at Crooked Creek Food Pantry, that QR code will get you right there. So those are two specific ways that you can take action. And Dave is going to come up and talk about two more. But before you do that, Dave, one of yours is to talk about the Good Wages Initiative and how employers can be certified. And I just want to share with everybody here that as we prepared for today and learned about the Good Wages Initiative, which I didn't know about before we were getting ready for this, as St. Luke's was learning about this, we are proud to share that after a few adjustments that were just made this week, will be applying ourselves to be a certified living wages employer. Something to be proud of.
Thanks, Shelley. Thank you, St. Luke's. That's wonderful news. We have about 78 organizations certified right now, and only one so far was a church, and I was just starting to be really disturbed about that because it feels like, and with your footprint in the community, having your leadership is just fantastic. With regard to the Good Wages Initiative, Shelley mentioned she didn't know about it. Most people don't know about it. And so one of the things we're doing is looking for ambassadors who would just know about it and raise awareness about it. And there will be an information session on May 22nd here at St. Luke's and online. And we'd love to have you come. We'll talk more about what it is and the specifics. And then if you're willing and interested, we'd love to, thank you, Shelley. There's a QR code in your program. And if you go in there, you can register for that. So come and check it out and see if maybe you'd like to be an ambassador for it in the community, because we all are work with various organizations, and so our thought was, well, gee, if we just mention this to the people we interact with anyways, we could go a long way towards raising the profile. The last, you've got great action opportunities here, is to write a letter. Fred mentioned that the Farm Bill is up this year. It only comes up every 5 years. The Farm Bill sounds like it would just be ag policy. It is ag policy, but it's also all of these federal nutrition programs, so school meals and SNAP and WIC and so on and so forth, and all the design of those. So the question we had about work requirements, that's a very active conversation right now. So we want our legislators to know that we think that these programs are vital to the people that we support, the people that come to Crooked Creek. If they make enough to be above 185% of poverty, they only rely on Crooked Creek, but everybody else relies on Crooked Creek as well as SNAP and WIC and school meals, which provides most of the food. So what our elected officials do with regard to these programs, which the big place for that conversation is in the Farm Bill, is really, really important to hungry people. So you have some options. You can, there's a code again. This is action number 2. You can use your phone. That'll take you to the Bread for the World website, where you can do a letter online. They give you a lot of text. The most important thing is to make it personal for you. We are told over and over again by the offices that if it's a form letter, they basically ignore it. And so the most important thing is to make it personal for you. There's also a piece of paper with a St. Luke's letterhead on there. If you're old-fashioned like me and you'd like to actually write out a letter, I encourage you to do that as well. So.
But Dave, tell us why you would like us to all take the 5 or 10 minutes right now, which is why we gave you letterhead right now, and actually handwrite a letter. Tell us about the impact of that over emails or sending your letter in on your own?
The important thing is that it's personalized. Well, first of all, we're all busy, right? As soon as I get home, I've got 6 more things that I need to do today. So if I write it right now, it's going to take 5 minutes. If I go home, I probably won't get to it. So that's number one. Number two is, as I said, personalizing is really important. To personalize an email, personalize a letter, however you do it, that's the thing that really gets their attention. It's amazing how much difference really our voices make. Yeah, Grace. Grace Kozak, who's our Bread for the World organizer for the state of Indiana, is here.
I just want to say a third reason why it's great to do it now is your letter can be part of a letter drop.
Yes.
The Senator Braun's office at the end of May.
Yes.
Senator Braun is on the Agriculture Committee, and he has an outsized impact on what goes into the Farm Bill. So your letters will join with hundreds from across the state at this letter drop.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. Yeah, and there was a St. Luke's class earlier today that wrote letters. We're expecting 80 congregations across the state to participate in this, and that's enough, frankly, to get Senator Braun and some of the representatives' attention, which is a good thing. So, questions or comments before we start into action? Yeah. The question was, have we tried to get this film in front of our legislators? Excellent question. We are working on it. We're working on special showings in hometowns and things like that to make it particularly easy for them to participate. So yes, we need them to see it. We did have a showing at Can Theater on the Near East Side this week, and we had a person from Representative Carson's office and a person from Senator Young's office with us, which was great, but we need to do a lot more of that. Yeah. Yes, the question is, are they posted? Yes. If you go on the Indy Hunger Network website, there is a page on there, and you can stream the film, by the way. We want people to see it. There's no charge. You can stream it from links that are on that page. There's also a resource guide if you want to have a group of people look at it. And there's a list you can click from there and get to a listing of showings around the state. So, yeah, great. Another great. Yep, and then we better get started. Yeah, go ahead. WFYI did. Yeah, WFYI did run it multiple times. Other stations around the state have, public television stations around the state have run it. And you can get to it actually also on the, I think it's on the national public television website. Yep.
So, we told you we were going to take till 4 o'clock today, and nobody is disappointed when we end early, but that means you do have time before you go to write your letter and drop it off in the back. We would love to collect letters today from a lot of you and still be able to you could send an email or other letters to other representatives. And I think that Dave and Fred will be around here for a few minutes as we're wrapping up, so if you have other questions, you can talk to them. But yeah, I just thank you all for coming. This is an important topic. Thank you. This is an important topic, and it's going to take us all working together to do something about it. And hopefully you have learned some information as well as some of those specific steps to take as we keep fighting this. So thank you all. Write your letters, and then you're free to go.